Hi, I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And we've had one of our commentators say that Sam should disagree with me more. Do you agree with that?
No, I disagree with that.
So he is now disagreeing with me more.
Oh, so you think I should disagree with you more?
No, I disagree.
No, I'm just confused.
You're confused.
Yeah.
Just on that point, Sam has been trained.
Yeah, if I disagree with him, I'll disagree. I'm not going to try and find points to do it on.
Oh, go on.
Okay, this video I'll be...
Yeah,
I'll find some.
Really picky. Yeah. So anyway, that's what we have to say about that. Probably I do most of the talking because I can't shut up.
Yeah, you have.
Because I've spent a lifetime doing this, and my whole adult lifetime, which has been incredibly long, because I'm very old, and he isn't even an adult yet, so he doesn't know anything yet.
17.
17. Imagine that. I don't think I can.
Yeah.
He's what, a third of my age. Not
so get closer and closer to your
Not
age.
even that, actually.
No?
Less than a third of my
17th.
age.
Yeah.
For a lot of that, he was a baby. Till about a year ago. Anyway, getting to some kind of point, we're going to talk about gatekeeping. Now, that isn't, as you may think, opening and closing the gates at a school or somewhere, though it could be thought of that way. It is a practice of information control, which Stephen Hassan highlights in his BITE model, behaviour, information, thought and emotion. And he added information in. The other three Leon Festinger had in his model of cognitive dissonance, and Steve very cleverly realised control of information is extremely important. And this is called gatekeeping, where somebody controls what information you have. And we watched a little video.
The brainwashing of my dad.
Yeah, which wasn't about the brainwashing of his dad.
No.
I was brainwashed quite separately in this video. Which is fascinating about... well, what's it about? Tell us what it's about.
Well, basically, the dad, in this instance, limits his control of information by only watching Fox News. I mean, he also gets emails from his friends.
And he listens to Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, that's how it starts. And basically you see him from being quite a mild person to have quite extreme right-wing views.
And from being tolerant to becoming angry.
Yeah.
And his daughter, who made the film, and it's on YouTube, so it's free to go and find. I think, is it on YouTube or is it on Prime or so? I don't know. It didn't cost us anything, so we don't care. It's an incredible little documentary because it shows how the control of information can change attitudes and behaviours. And in this case, she communicated through Skype with lots and lots of people who are saying, yeah, that happened to my dad too. And so her mum, who is obviously a sage human being, basically, when she retuned the TV, she cut out Fox News. She cut off his feed to Rush Limbaugh, and she then had him get email from more liberal sources of, and don't want to say more accurate sources, given that Rush Limbaugh, whatever you think, is full of crap. And very angry. And that's not a very good way to be in the world, I don't think. I don't like it anyway when people are very angry with me. And you got cases where, one father had refused to speak to his daughter because she didn't agree. She said something about Barack Obama.
Yeah, that she liked Barack Obama or something. Like, how dare you? And
what we saw was this old guy, as this material was taken away from him, he returned to being rational, tolerant, thinking about things, and he agreed that he had been a bit odd during this period of time. So this is gatekeeping. It works in authoritarian groups, so-called cult groups, destructive cult groups, where there are things you're not allowed to read, you're not allowed to look at, and so you're censored. The Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, I think that's their full sobriquet, the Catholic Church, had an index of prohibited books for many centuries. And I think it was the 1950s, it might be more recent, that they finally decided they wouldn't stop people from reading books. And there's a presumption in this which is authoritarian. Yeah, we know, and you don't. And I remember talking with Stacey Young, and she'd come out of Scientology, and she'd written the critical pack about Bent Corridon and Brian Ambry's book, L. Ron Hubbard, Messiah or Madman. And so she was the person that actually, the fact finder that went and did the true, false, false, true sort of things, which is called a dead agent pack in Scientology, because an agent who has been discovered to be untruthful will not be listened to. It comes from Sun Tzu's Art of War, one of the basic books about war used by Scientology's harassment teams. Clausewitz they also use, and Black Boomerang by Sefton Delmar, various lovely scriptural things. But she said, having read Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, that she couldn't find anything to dead agent in it. So, which was very gratifying, you know, that somebody who'd actually worked in the Ron Hubbard archives and was familiar with material said, I couldn't find a single thing that was wrong in it. But what will happen in the group is that they'll say, well, you mustn't read this because it was inspired by the devil. And you won't be, being a weak-minded person, and not, you know, like we people who lead, you won't actually, you know, it will confuse and confound you, and you'll start believing things that are wrong. Now, okay, maybe Rush Limbaugh should be on the prohibited index, you know. Maybe people should have to have a, you know, passed a psychiatric test to make sure that they can tell the fish from the plants, but and it extends from, it's a really big cultural thing that you can't trust this, you can't trust that. You know, I had a friend, I recommended a book by the brilliant historian Norman Cohn, who, you know, if I said there were maybe 10 authors who've really influenced the way I think during my lifetime, Cohn is definitely one of them. And my friend said it was his book about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which are a complete fabricated nonsense, actually written by a member of the Russian secret police. Well, when I say written, it's actually a critique of Napoleon III, written by a Frenchman who was punished for writing it. And they've just changed some of the words and put in the word Zionism throughout. Yeah. And you can find copies of it that were published, I think, 30 years before it became the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Of course, distributed by Henry Ford to all of his workers, and distributed by Hitler to all of his followers, and still a popular book for some reason. So he wrote a book called Warrant for Genocide, which I recommend alongside anything that Norman Cohn wrote. The Pursuit of the Millennium, for me, was a book that started to make me think about Scientology, because it made me think about fanaticism, you know, and it was about 2 years before I left, but it's sort of this thing where I'm going, oh, I know people that think like that. They won't talk about certain things. They won't think about certain things. They're gatekeeping. Yeah. I'm not frightened of anybody's opinion. I will read anything, as long as I can understand it, which I'm afraid sometimes I can't. Immanuel Kant, I mean, what is that about? But I'm not frightened that it will somehow change me. You know, I'll be transformed in some way. And I do understand, as Yuval Noah has pretty much shown, that it requires an emotional experience of some kind to actually make us irrationally. But you mentioned something about China. Elaborate upon the Great Firewall.
The Great Firewall.
That's what they call it. Great Firewall of China.
For example, is it NFA, National Football Association? NFL, something like that.
National Football League.
China threatened to withdraw support from them because one of their football players said that they liked South Park. And at that time, South Park had issued an episode which was a little bit critical of the Chinese government.
I can't see anything wrong with that.
But I suppose that is the ultimate form of authoritarianism, when you're controlling the information that your people have access to. You can't have true democracy if they don't have access to proper information.
You can't have anything like democracy, and seeing the great tech giants sort of just bow down and say, look, they're a fifth of the world. We'll build, a Google platform that they can use that doesn't say anything about Mao Zedong having been the cause of the death of perhaps 70 million people. No. It's a lovely bloke. Lovely bloke. It's something we do to ourselves as well. And it's a fundamental root of the biggest human problem, which is my side bias, confirmation bias, the cognitive dissonance, the wobbliness that comes up when somebody disagrees with something we believe. Now, I have come to really relish intelligent disagreement, that if somebody comes to me and says, you got your facts wrong, then of course it's, you don't want to be wrong, and that's no fun. But when I've got past that initial thing, rather than sort of batting them away as obviously a half-wit, I really, like it. Really, because it engages me, whereas just lazily going along with what I already believe. And certain of my significant beliefs have been changed over the years. When I was involved with Scientology, the gatekeeping practice didn't really work. I read The Mind Benders by Cyril Vosper. I read Cults of Unreason by Christopher Evans. I skimmed through The Road to Total Freedom, and it should be The Bridge to Total Freedom. I mean, he even got the title on, it's The Road to Freedom or The Bridge to Total Freedom, which is an excellent book by the sociologist, the late Roy Wallace, remarkable man. The only thing I balked at was we got a copy of Inside Scientology, not Janet Reitman's Inside Scientology. Even the title to the book was stolen. But I really do have it in for her. But let's face it, she made a lot of money by rewriting my book.
Okay.
Good for her.
No,
not good for her. Bad woman. But in fact, the title of the book was also taken from Robert Kaufman, who was the first person, contrary to various newspaper reports that I've seen, to publish the content of the terribly secret OT3 material, which can also be found in South Park, and caused
and is now on Netflix.
Isaac Hayes to leave the cast because he was a Scientologist. So, in fact, Scientology they put a net nanny onto a disc without telling people they'd done this, I'm told. And you were sent it out as something you should install on your computer, and it blocked sites by critics.
Oh my!
So, but we can do it to ourselves, and teaching kids to like to engage in conversation and learn more, rather than fighting off things that might help us. There is no danger in information in and of itself. When I left Scientology, I determined that I would check beliefs that I've been given. So, for example, I'm going to have a go at her again. There's a woman called, a dreadful woman called Adele Davis, who wrote books on nutrition. I remember, Let's Eat Right to Keep Fit. And these are very much touted in Scientology. And it's absolute pseudoscience. It was proven in court that she actually employed a team of researchers not to read papers about nutrition, but to list papers about nutrition that she could put in the back of her books. She couldn't even be bothered to go and look up the titles herself. And some of her recommendations, the reason she was in court is because somebody had died as a consequence of following her advice. So I said, well, I've been fed all this stuff about nutrition and vitamins and these massive amounts of vitamin C, which is a strong acid that burns your stomach lining. And you just pee it out when you take more than the sort of 180 milligrams recommended daily dose, or whatever suits your metabolism. So I just went, well, what's the standard view of nutrition? I read a book by a guy called Professor Bender, who in his time off, is it Futurama that he does as well?
Yeah, that's
was actually a professor of nutrition in one of the London universities. And that seemed a lot more sensible, and it gave me the plan that if I'm going to read something wacky, then I try to look for something that is the generally held point of view. And sometimes the generally held point of view will be wrong.
Oh, wow.
So, ulcers are caused by stress. No, they're not. 95% of them are caused by a nasty little bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. But Barry Marshall, and the guy who worked with him, his name escapes me, spent 10 years persuading the medical profession, and this is not a long time ago, this is in the 1980s, that it wasn't stress, whatever stress is, and we're still yet, it's a word that's just been accepted into the language as if it was medically approved. Actually, the word was developed by a man working for the tobacco industry. So you've got to watch out, that as smoking relieved stress, whatever that is. I'm so stressed by that. So where on earth am I going with all of this? That it can be that, as Barry Marshall proved, that the textbooks, the medical textbooks, the authoritative textbooks that say no bacteria can live in the stomach, which is why doctors knew he was wrong.
Textbook says it.
Yeah, the book says so. That it's a good idea to consider new information, and a way of determining whether a group is actually authoritarian and controlling and bullying in its view. If it tells you there are people you can't talk to, so your right to freedom of assembly is curtailed. There are things you can't say, so your freedom of speech is curtailed. I would say that hate speech is not something that I personally approve of, and I'm shocked by the nastiness of some of the white nationalist sites in the US, the hateful words they use. Incitement to riot is also not a good thing in speech. That if you're getting people to go and hurt other people, we might. But if you want to write it down, I'm happy to read it. If you can write it in, polite language. If you're in a group that says you've got to shun people, disconnect from people, ostracize people, you've got to not read this, not read that, and that they're basically saying you're not adult enough, you're not grown up enough to make decisions for yourself.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, that parents often do control what their children cannot have access to.
Parental controls.
Yeah, which is fair enough when it's like, stay away from GTA 5 till you're, 15 or something.
Though you were 8 when, unfortunately, another child introduced you to it. To my chagrin, I was very annoyed about that. But my complaints fell on deaf ears, I'm afraid. We won't get into that. That there are proper age restrictions, horrific movies, obscenely pornographic things. I'm still not totally sure that sex should suffer from less prohibition or as much prohibition as violence, that we actually see quite a lot of violence on TV in normal shows. And the presumption that the human body is somehow vile and horrible seems strange to me. And it does belong to our culture.
Yeah.
If we look back to, there's a great series called Pornography, A History of Civilization, which I think, again, is on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you suddenly find that it's a very modern invention, this idea that nudity is bad and the kind of prudishness around it. But, yes, it's right that parents should allow content that is suitable for children, but intellectual content, things to think about, I don't think...
like when they say the tooth fairy, the Santa Claus myth, I think that might be a bad idea, providing children with incorrect information.
What, you don't believe in Santa?
What, I thought he was made up.
No, Santa's real. Santa's real. I actually did get into trouble with that. I was in Chicago seeing a friend of mine many years ago. And I put forward this point that maybe teaching magical thinking to children and letting them believe in this kind of stuff could be a bit dangerous later on. And his girlfriend started crying and told me that she'd grown up in an abusive household where the only thing that she looked forward to was Christmas, and if Santa, and it sort of seemed that it was impossible to explain. Basically, that belief in love, truth, and justice might be better than the belief in the tooth fairy. And why eggs? And bunnies.
I don't know.
The bunnies are what is it?
Humans
the
are
bunnies
weird.
lay the eggs. Why are the eggs made of chocolate? It's very confusing, the world we live in. So gatekeeping, China, North Korea, and this, in the UK, you have what's called the D notice, which you reminded me of earlier, where the media can be told that they cannot report a story. So the story I was interested in when I was writing about it 30 years ago was an organisation called Gladio, which was an organisation created by Belgian, British and American intelligence in 1947. They were given a load of gold bars, Krugerrands, and all communication was cut off. Their job was that if communism took over in Europe, if communist governments came to power in Western Europe, they were to sabotage it. So they didn't really have any work to do. I think the Italians had a couple of communist MPs, and so they went rogue, and they started killing people. They set up a group called Ordo Nuevo, which was a pretend right-wing group, and they killed, I think, 9 Italian policemen. And there was a period where the Belgian Ministry of the Interior, this must have been in the late 1980s, the Belgian Ministry of Defence discovered these files. And Margaret Thatcher said, please don't talk about what's in them. Have your hearings in camera, in private. And they refused. At the same time, for the first time ever, an Italian member of parliament was convicted of murder for his involvement with this organisation, which one of the names for it is Gladio. It's so secret we don't even know what it was called. And suddenly his conviction was quashed and he was let go. Then we had the Order of the Solar Temple, who committed suicides, I think, in Canada, Switzerland and France, who were also part of Gladio. They were part of this bizarre organisation. So the British press didn't report on it. So I was having to get the internet's a wonderful thing, but it didn't exist then. The World Wide Web didn't exist anyway, so you couldn't get into it. And I was having to find information about this. And it was fascinating to see that a story so important that terrorist groups were being established using government funding that had been meant to keep communism at bay. I think most of our intelligence agencies have gone rogue anyway, the CIA and MI6 and what have you. They've done awful things. And, I'm going to say it again, that the movie The Report, the torture report, I am shocked that Barack Obama did not sack the people in the CIA who employed the torturers and who actually did the torture. They're still there, folks. That's another kind of gatekeeping where you say, okay, it doesn't really matter. You have to actually pursue justice to the end. And gatekeeping tends to be a way of perpetuating lies, of stopping people from thinking for themselves and keeping people in a child position. And we're against it.
No.
Do you agree with that?
I feel like I'm supposed to say no, but I do.
You could sing Groucho's whatever it is.
I'm against it, even if I first commenced it.
That's it. So that's all we have to say about that. And I am John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And we thank you very much for your time and your company. What, you don't believe in Santa?
What, I thought he was made up.
No, Santa's real.